Hello everyone, Prime here, and I hope you're having a great day, because today we're going to be going over the much requested Thoth. I will be calling him Thoth for the majority of the video, even though I will go over the proper way to say his name, which is slightly different, but yes, we're going with Thoth. Facts about him, lore, his stories, and all of that good jazz. So, Thoth, apparently, is supposed to say an A, not an O sound. Also known as Jehuti, Tahuti, Tetu, just to name a few. He had much more names than that, but if I sat here and went over all of his names, we'd be here for a while. I'm pronouncing the T at the end of Jehuti and Tahuti. The person who I found pronouncing these names didn't pronounce the T, they just skipped it entirely. I'm not sure if this is just an American thing, or if I'm genuinely supposed to not pronounce the T. I'm sure some of you can clear this up for us. He also had a female counterpart, who some say he actually genuinely was a counterpart. Most places seem to say that he was either his daughter or his wife, and her name was Seshat, she who scribes. Now, Seshat is credited with being the creator of writing, but Thoth is also sometimes credited with this as well. Because of the fact that he was credited with the invention of writing, among other things, the Greeks thought of Thoth and Hermes as one and the same deity. Sometimes you might see him with the head of a baboon, a sacred animal to him, but most commonly he had the head of an Ibis. Most of the time he'd be rocking an Atef crown, but others you might see him with a crescent moon crown, or perhaps some other sort of crown. But those two were the most common. He acted as the voice of Ra, so you know that he was at the very least a fairly important chap. And depending on the myths that we go with, Thoth was either the most important deity, or just, as I said, a very important one. Being the god of knowledge, the moon, wisdom, thought, intelligence, the mind, reason, magic, writing, scribes, meditation, logic, mathematics, and so much more, Thoth had a lot of titles to his name, and as you might imagine, he gained a lot more epitaphs. He led the Ogdoa, meaning City of the Eight. The Ogdoa consisted of 8 deities, 4 gods and their wives, and together they signified the creative powers such as primal waters, air, and darkness, things of this nature. Some of the gods in this group left over time, such as Amun, and he left to become a more important supreme deity who created the earth and many things. Of course, there are a lot of myths in which different gods in Egyptian mythology claimed to in some way create the earth. So, Neith was credited with it, Ra was credited with it, Amun was credited with it, but, more specific to this video, Thoth was credited with creating the earth. One of the creational myths say that an Ibis, or i.e. Thoth in the form of an Ibis, gave birth to the sun god, who then created the earth, or an aspect of this deity. So okay, technically it wasn't Thoth that crafted the earth, but he gave birth to the being that did, so props to Thoth for that. The sun god may have been Ra, or it may have been Khepri, or it may have been someone else. This is likely... I hesitate to call this a retcon because it doesn't... We'll go with a retcon, even though I probably shouldn't call it a retcon, because Thoth's cult was apparently created after the original Ogdoa myth, who were sometimes known as the Souls of Thoth. You see, the Ogdoa not only existed prior to Thoth's inception into mythology, or at least inception into mythology as a greater deity, because he worked under Ra in mythology before this point, and was one of his sons, but as soon as Thoth gained a lot of popularity, he was given... Sorry, I keep speaking about Thoth as if this is a fictional book or show, and that feels a bit disrespectful, but he was credited with, well, essentially being one of the most powerful deities in Smite, really, and the entirety of Egyptian mythology. He was also an arbiter, one being with the absolute power in many scenarios. This really helped out Osiris in his myths, but so that I don't take away too much from Isis and Osiris's videos, I won't mention too much about that. In one of the myths in which Thoth is said to be this all-powerful deity, it's actually said that he spoke himself into being with magic. I suppose he was bored of not being alive one day, so he just said a few words and poof, Thoth? I don't actually know the details, but there you go. Seshat was said to be a primordial goddess of wisdom as well. So I suppose in most myths he was most likely the wife of Thoth rather than being one of his daughters. But as she's still said in some myths to be his daughter, I mention it. Though it should be said, in some other myths and places online will tell you that Seshat was actually an aspect or another part of Ra, not necessarily being a daughter or a wife, which might be important to consider. Eventually, over time though, Thoth eventually took over a lot of Seshat's responsibilities, and which is why he has so many things that he resides over, I like to think. Their child, if they were actually married, was Hornhump. Probably not saying that right, but there you go. With Numot, goddess of protection, he had Neferhor. Now, brace yourselves if you're a bit homophobic, because you may or may not like this next part, but apparently he had a relationship with Astenu, a male baboon that was living in the underworld, or had duties in the underworld. Of course, it was also said that Astenu was an aspect of Thoth, but I felt like mentioning this anyway. And also, I don't know if Thoth was necessarily promiscuous, or if he simply just had different wives in different myths, but there you go. Considering the fact that he's usually depicted as a sort of wise man, mentor-esque, teacher-like guy, I don't like to think of him as the promiscuous type. It doesn't really fit. But these are gods we're talking about, so anything is possible. After the alterations to the myths, Thoth would have been the father of Ra, rather than his son. Thoth was also a pretty good talker, and was able to talk Tefnut out of eating people, and return to Ra after the two of them had a bit of a falling out. Remember I go over this story in Geb's video? I'll give you a shorter version. Tefnut, who may or may not have been Bastet, was mad at Ra one day because they had a bit of an argument, and she was so mad that she took all the water and moisture away from the great city that Ra ruled over and just left and decided to terrorize people, turning into a cat and eating them. Pretty understandable to see now why cats aren't my favorite animals. Have you ever been eaten by a cat? Don't. It's not a very enjoyable experience. Trust me. So, Ra sent her husband Shu and Thoth after them. And it was Thoth who was able to smooth talk her into going back into the city by telling her that there would be a great celebration when she returned and that the people missed her ever so greatly. Which they did, and when they returned there was a great celebration. So Thoth didn't lie, which is nice to know. Also, during the quest to find Tefnut, Thoth transformed himself and Shu into a baboon, which is nice to note that he has that power. Of course, after we progress a little further in this video, you'll realize that him turning into a baboon may be a bit of a trivial power, but again, nice to mention. With the help of Seshat, he maintained the libraries of the gods, and he also documented the verdict on the dearly departed in the hall of Myat. Probably not saying that correctly, but Myat, who may or may not have been another one of his wives or consorts. Here he gained such titles as He Who Balances, God of Equilibrium, or rather, God of the Equilibrium, and Master of the Balance. Ra also gave him dominion over the underworld, or a part of it, the land of caves. He took note of the inhabitants of this place, issuing just punishments upon them if warranted. Which is why you get so many references in games for Thoth acting as some sort of judge, jury, and executioner style person, because he technically sort of was, to a degree. There's a point in Osiris's tale where Thoth shows off his ability to be the judge, jury, and executioner, or at least just the judge and the jury, quite well, and it really works out for Osiris. Not too well for Set, but Set's kind of a dick, so, you know. Or at least, the way the story is told, he's pretty much presented and made out to be a dick. I suppose really he was kind of the bookkeeper of the underworld. But more significantly, Thoth wrote a lot of books. He's most famous for writing the Book of the Dead / Breathings, or the Book of Thoth, which we'll get to, which Isis also gets a footnote in writing the Book of the Dead. But Apparently, according to historians, Thoth wrote over 300,000 books across the entirety of Egyptian mythology. So that's something to note. Thanks to this, he gained the epitaph, author of every work on every branch of knowledge, both human and divine. All the universe's secrets inscribed within this. Now, the Book of Thoth is considered to be a great legendary book, but it's very, very dangerous at the same time to humans, or simply just to those who the gods did not want to have. It's so important because it contains all of the universe's secrets, and if you were to read it, you would gain excessive knowledge. You would be on the level of a legendary sorcerer, a great mage, someone who would warrant respect. Unfortunately, though, for humans, there was a curse associated with this book to prevent people from tampering with it. In another video, I will go into more detail about this curse, and that video may be posted today, tomorrow, or Monday, depending on how fast I am with editing the next video. But to give you a quick description of this curse, anyone who tampered with the book, picked it up, or just had the book in their possession would, of course, gain great power if they read the book. Unfortunately, though, their loved ones would start to disappear. And that's my nice way of saying they would die. In unfortunate ways, perhaps, but they would die all the same. And that's just the way Thoth kept it protected from humans. Because when the book is returned, the loved ones would stop dying, which gives you obvious incentive to return the book. For other beings, though, all I could find is that the book would curse you with knowledge. I'm not sure what knowledge or what this might mean, and I don't know if there's any sort of punishment or restriction for gods that would want to read this book. So let me know about that if you know the answer to that in the comment section below. Also, I know there's probably a point to the book being linked to humans and how humans aren't supposed to touch it and curse and yada yada yada, but Thoth spoke himself into existence. You mean to tell me that he couldn't just create a magic spell that just prevented humans from getting their hands on it, or only allowed the people who were supposed to have the book's knowledge kept for them? I don't know, a special spell that just kept the book from anyone else's grasp, or something like that. You'd think the person who spoke himself into existence and knows all of these spells and wrote the book on pretty much any spell we could possibly imagine would have a failsafe so simple, no? Sorry, I felt like that was a plot hole and it bothered me. Moving on, Thoth also made the 360-day calendar, rather, that's not quite true. He made the 360-day calendar a bit obsolete. Fair warning, you may want to skip ahead because I'm about to tell you a variation of a story that I told in Geb's Law video that's different here that may ruin Ra for you. You know how Zeus is always horny? Yeah, it's something of that nature. So skip ahead about 30 seconds if you don't want to hear, but Ra really desired his daughter, Nut, or Newt, not sure how to pronounce that. Nut, we'll go with Nut, who was interested in Geb, her brother. Ra didn't like this, and so he separated the two. And not only did he separate the two, but he also made Nut infertile. Nut wasn't pleased about this, so she went to Thoth, and Thoth decided to help her. He gambled, or played chess with the moon, and after winning some of the moon's light, he won about 5 extra days for us, which was enough time for Geb and Nut to get together, and they had their children, including Osiris, Nemesis, Isis, Set, and possibly Horus. Horus is a bit tricky. His parents kind of vary, but that's a topic for another day. The variation that I told in Geb's video was that because Ra was trying to work on the earth, but the sky and the earth were always together, he couldn't get anything done, so he had to separate them. He separated them in a fairly painful way, but still, it doesn't make him look like a completely overly horny douchebag, like Zeus was, but you know. I hope that you enjoyed this one. If you did, go ahead and leave it a like, as that does help out quite a lot. Next up, the next most requested deity seems to be Hel, and then the next most requested is looking like Neith. So we'll see how that goes. I won't necessarily do the most requested deity, but it does make a lot of sense to do the most requested deities as they come, so there's that. And I might have something in the works for Erlong Shen as well, so watch out for that. If you're new to the channel and want to see more content just like this, you're only a subscribe button away, so have fun with that. And if there's anything I missed about Thoth that you think is good enough to share, go ahead and share that with us in the comment section below. But until the next video, I've been Prime, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Good night.